In the politics, Aristotle is not as clear as he might be, as we might wish he would be, at least, about what the best kind of happiness is. So, in chapter 3 of book 7, he discusses what various people say. Some people say the political life, and he gives the kind of arguments and so on that people would give. Um, he's not really clear, however, but how exactly he answers that question. You might think he should be clear because, as we were just discussing in the previous video, it makes no small difference whether the contemplative life or the political life is the best kind of happiness, the best kind of life. And yet, then Aristotle himself is unclear about that answer, at least in the politics, because in the Nicomachean Ethics, he is very clear about what exactly he thinks the best kind of life is, whether it's the political or the contemplative life. In the Nicomachean Ethics, in Book 10, chapters, it's really kind of 6 to 8, but we're only reading 7 to 8. He considers the same question that he was considering in those opening chapters of Book 7. What's the best kind of life? Is it the political life or the contemplative life? The way he puts it in chapter 7, what is the question? Well, we're trying to figure out what happiness is. We're trying to figure out what, I should say, what the best kind of happiness is. Well, the best kind of happiness is going to be rational activity in accordance with the highest virtue. That's the way he puts it in book 7. So when we're trying to decide this contest between the political life and the contemplative life, it becomes a question of, well, which of the virtues involved in each of the lives is higher? That'll answer the question. He says actually something similar in book 1, chapter 7 of the Nicomachean Ethics. At the conclusion of the function argument, he says happiness is rational activity in accordance with virtue. Okay, fine, we read that, we talked about that. But he actually continues in book 1, chapter 7. Happiness is rational activity in accordance with virtue. And if there's more than one virtue, then the best and most complete virtue. That's what he says in book 1, chapter 7. He doesn't do anything with it at the time, and it wasn't particularly relevant to us at the time. But now we've seen, there are a lot of virtues according to Aristotle. And so when we're trying to look for what happiness really, strictly speaking, is, well, we've got to find the best, most complete, highest virtue. And the sense of complete there is actually helpful. Recall, he's got this kind of technical sense of complete, something that's chosen for its own sake and not for the sake of anything else. And so we're looking for the virtue that is most like that, that's most chosen for its own sake and not for the sake of other things. Whatever that virtue is, that's the highest, most complete, best virtue. That's kind of what he's thinking here. All right, so we want to find, what is this? What's the highest virtue? What's the best kind of rational activity? What's the best kind of happiness? Well, what Aristotle says in book 10, chapter 7, is that the best or highest or most complete, or whatever, however you want to describe it, he's kind of free with his terminology here, but the best virtue is the virtue of the best thing in us. There are multiple parts of us, right? You got hands, you got eyes, you got emotions, you got appetites, and so on. You have your mind, your legs. The virtue of the best one of those things, right? Of all those things, legs and appetites, your mind, your hand, your eyes, and so on, which of those is best? Because whichever of those is best, well, the virtue of that thing, the characteristic that enables that thing to perform its function well, that's the best virtue. Aristotle claims that the best thing in us is our reason, our rationality, our mind, or our intellect would be another way of putting the point. And so the best virtue is going to be the virtue of that, the virtue of our mind or intellect. And the virtue of our mind or intellect, the virtue of our reason, is wisdom. And so you can already see where he's going. He's arguing that the contemplative life is the best kind of happiness. that's really what we should be aiming at. But before we get there, and we'll get there in just a second, I want to say a bit about the best thing in us is our reason, our mind. Why I think that? Aristotle kind of just asserts it. He doesn't really. Why would you think that that's true? Um, why not something? I don't know what else, but why not something else? Why that? I take it as idea something like this. There are kind of two ways of approaching it. From those things that are kind of below human beings and from those things that are above human beings, so to speak. And you'll see what I mean in just a second. Approach it from those things that are below. Aristotle thinks that human beings, they're animals, just like cows and chickens and so on. They're living things, just like cows, chickens, and grass and trees and whatever, right? There's a lot of commonality between all those things. But human beings kind of stand apart. They stand, and we've already seen in the function argument how exactly he thinks they stand apart. Human beings are unique among these animals in that they are rational. It's what distinguishes, right? So our ability to perceive, sure, that distinguishes us from grass or whatever. But our ability to engage in reason and rational reflection, our ability to bring concepts to bear on experience, distinguishes us from animals. That's Aristotle's idea. And it kind of elevates us above the animals, Aristotle would want to say. It enables us to do more and engage in more valuable kinds of activities, right? Eating is a valuable activity, right? It's a worthwhile thing to do. Animals do that. Human beings do that. But what's even better than eating would be, according to Aristotle, say, understanding, right? That's a better kind of activity. Understanding how and why things work the way they do. That's a more choice-worthy, a more valuable kind of activity. And animals, cows, chickens can't do that. Human beings can. And they can do it because they have reason. It's an exercise of reason. Yeah, something like that is Aristotle's idea. And so it's our reason, our minds, that's the best part of us, because that's what kind of distinguishes us from the animals, right? So that's like looking at it from, coming from below. But you can also come at this idea from above, so to speak. According to Aristotle, there are gods or God. It's whatever. It's kind of unclear what exactly he thinks about the divine. There are multiple divine beings. Maybe there's only one God. It's on whatever he thinks. However many there are, I'll just talk about gods. He doesn't believe in the traditional Greek gods, Zeus and Dionysus and whatever. That's not what he's talking about. There are gods. Okay, fine. His view is they don't have bodies. Right. And this is, well, okay. I think most people who believe in God today don't, well, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think most people tend not to think of God as being just like another fellow, whatever, walking around with a body. Most people think of God as being immaterial. So does Aristotle. Well, if they don't have bodies, they don't have appetites, they don't have emotions. Aristotle thinks it's to have emotions, you need a body. All the gods do then, the only kind of life they could possibly live is a life of the mind. All they have is a mind, according to Aristotle. And so his view of the gods is that they are just thinking. They're thinking things that just spend their lives thinking, engaging in thought and understanding. That's the only part of a soul that they have. That's all that they are. They don't have an appetitive part of the soul or anything like that because they don't have bodies. Well, Aristotle's idea is that we have a kind of fragment of the divine in us. The gods, the divine beings, just are reason or minds. Well, we have a fragment of that in us. There's this kind of divine element within us, our minds, our intellects, our reason. right? And so, yeah, that's why it's the best part of us. It's this kind of divine fragment that we have. It's this divine part of us. So, of course, in as much as the gods are better than us, which Aristotle thinks, of course, this divine part of us is the best part of us, right? And so the virtue of that part is the best or highest, most complete virtue. And the virtue of that part is wisdom, according to Aristotle, right? And so it's going to turn out that happiness, the best kind of happiness, strictly speaking, is the activity of wisdom. It's the life of the mind. And by wisdom, what he has in mind is a kind of thorough and systematic understanding of why things happen the way they do. So there's, it's a kind of the most basic, fundamental understanding of why things are the way they are. The basic, most fundamental understanding. That's his view of wisdom. Happiness consists in acquiring that kind of knowledge and in thinking about that kind of knowledge, having that kind of understanding. This life of the mind where we grasp the most important and fundamental truths about things. That's wisdom. That's what happiness is, strictly speaking. Now, Aristotle uses the word contemplation in a technical sense. He uses it to refer to the activity of wisdom. He uses it to refer to what I've just been describing. He does not mean by contemplation what you or I might mean, right? When you just kind of zone out and just think about nothing, or you contemplate, whatever. What am I going to do with my life? Or whatever, uh, I don't know what else people would contemplate or what we'd say people contemplate. That's not what he means. He has something very specific in mind, right? The activity of wisdom. And the activity of wisdom is this kind of understanding of fundamental truths, the most fundamental truths about reality and about human beings and human beings' place in reality and so on. That's contemplation, this life of of the mind, right? And so, very clearly, then, the contemplative life, the life of contemplation, the life devoted to wisdom is going to be the best life. That's Aristotle's view. One thing I want to say at this point, consider its contender, the political life. Why, somebody might say, well, I don't know, this life of the mind business and the divine, and we're better than animals. And so, okay, fine, whatever, Aristotle. But come on, the political life, the life of justice, at the very least, that seems better, right? Justice seems to be the best, most important virtue, right? Temperance, yeah, maybe that's kind of important, but it's not like the most important thing, right? But justice really seems to be the most important virtue. How could, and Aristotle would deny that. He'd say wisdom is. In book 6, that's what he says. He gives an argument to that effect. We didn't read it, but he gives an argument to the effect that wisdom is a better virtue than any of the other virtues. How could he possibly not? What's going on here? Why not? How could he think wisdom is better than justice? Well, what Aristotle points out and what Aristotle thinks, justice isn't really that complete. It's not really. So this would be one thing. This would be one thing you would say. Yeah, we choose it for its own sake, I guess, but we also choose it because it brings peace and order. And so it's valuable for things beyond itself. That's a sign that it's not really complete. Contemplation, by contrast, wisdom, right? If it's approached appropriately in the way it should be, it is complete. We don't go do it so that we can do something with it. We want this kind of understanding simply so that we know, so that we grasp the truth, right? And so it's more complete in that sense. Another thing Aristotle points out, it'd be better if we didn't have any need of justice. It'd be a better world if we never had to be just. or never had to, make use of this virtue. In a certain sense, a world without justice, a world where we don't need to be just, where we don't need that virtue, would be better. It'd be better. And so that might seem a little bit odd. Like, well, what he points out is that justice is often necessary when it's necessary because something has gone wrong, right? We need to go to the court and justice needs to be served because I stole your laptop, right? And so I've got to be punished. You got to get your laptop back, blah, 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 blah. I got to go to jail, whatever, right? Justice needs to be served because I did something wrong. Justice is often used, or it's often called for, it's often necessary to rectify injustice, right? It's because some other people mistreated people. That's why we need justice. Aristotle's point is that wouldn't it be better if those people were never mistreated in the first place? If I never stole your laptop, that would be a better world. It'd be a better world if there were no need for justice, right? Well, there's no need for it. It can't be the final, most complete, highest good then, right? What would we do with our time if there were no need for justice? That question would open up, right? If justice really were the most important virtue, we should bemoan a world in which there was no need for it then, because that would be a world in which you can't live the best kind of life. We should, in some sense, hope for a world in which there is injustice to rectify so that we can act on our justice and so on. But clearly that's absurd. Clearly we don't want a world like that, and Aristotle would recognize that. And so justice is not really the best virtue. It's not even really the most choice-worthy. We choose it out of necessity, he says. Right? It's because we have to, because these people were awful jerks to those other people. And so now we have to go and do this just stuff and ameliorate and rectify and so on. Would that they were never jerks in the first place, right? Wisdom's not like that. Aristotle would want to say, if all the problems of the world were solved and there were no need for justice, we'd still choose wisdom. Wisdom is choice-worthy regardless of circumstances like that, right? Is something like Aristotle's idea. And so it's choice-worthy really just for itself. Now, one last thing I want to say about all this stuff, right? Okay, so contemplation is the best kind of happiness. Got that. Recall what we talked about when we first kind of started in Aristotle. We had these for the sake of change. You watch the video to learn philosophy, to pass the class, get a degree, to get a job, get money, blah, 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 right? Whatever, right? And this is how we started trying to understand what Aristotle was up to. We do things for the sake of other things. What I want to point you to now is actually, it's kind of neat, or at least I think it's neat, but then maybe that's because I'm a nerd or something. I don't know. Two philosophy professors over, one's at the University of Toronto, one's at UC San Diego, I think, have recently uncovered fragments of a lost work of Aristotle. And they are attempting to kind of put it together. And so we'll have another work of Aristotle, this thing called the Protrepticus. It was a popular work that Aristotle wrote in defense of philosophy. What I want to share with you now is a passage from the Protrepticus, from this kind of work that these two philosophy professors are in the middle of trying to reconstruct. And, you know, I think a good way to kind of approach this is, okay, fine. Let's say you take, you know, you're taking this philosophy class. You think, man, I'm going to major in philosophy now. This is the best stuff. I couldn't possibly live without this. I'm doing philosophy forever. Philosophy major, right? And whatever. I'm do everything. Okay. Well, at some point you'd have to call your parents or talk to your family or talk to your friends, right? And you'll have to like, hey guys, I'm doing philosophy. What do you say to them? What do you expect that they would ask you? And how do you answer them? Well, Aristotle here in the Protrepticus gives you the answer. This is what you should say to them, right? So you call up mom and dad and they say, philosophy, what are you going to do with that? We're not spending $250,000 on philosophy. Give me a break. What's the point of that? What's the use of that? This is what you say. So here's Aristotle. Here's what he would say. To seek from every kind of knowledge something other than itself and to require that it must be useful, right? That's what people do today, yeah? What are you going to major in? Philosophy? What's the use in that? You got to do something useful, right? Do something, I don't know what's useful. There are plenty of things that are more useful than philosophy. Not to pick on any one major in particular, but, I don't know, accounting. That's for some reason the one that always comes into my mind, right? That's a pretty useful major. You learn things and you get a job and so on. Okay, fine. But to demand of every kind of knowledge something useful is the demand of someone utterly ignorant of how far apart in principle good things are from the necessities. They are totally different. In other words, what he's saying, you can't demand of every kind of knowledge, of everything that you might study, that it be useful. Well, why not? Then why do we study? For among the things without which living is impossible, the ones which are appreciated on account of something else should be called necessities, right? So those kinds of knowledge or those majors or those fields of study that we do because they get you something else, call that a necessity, right? They're appreciated on account of the fact that they give you the skills to then get the job, to get the money, blah, 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 blah. While all those that are appreciated for themselves, even if nothing else results from them, should be called goods in the strict sense. Think of it like this. What he's saying, if something's good for the sake of something else, well, that's a necessity. It's not really in itself a good, right? You want it because it gets you the other thing. And so that other thing better be good, or maybe that other thing is just a necessity and gets you to some good. But at some point, you got to get to something that is good in itself, that's good not as a means to something else. This is what he goes on to say. For this is not valuable. For this is not valuable because of that, and that for the sake of something else. And this goes on proceeding to infinity. You can't just keep going with these for the sake of chains. Rather, this comes to a stop somewhere. And where it comes to a stop, right, is going to be something that is good in itself. So it is absolutely ridiculous then to seek from everything a benefit beyond from the thing itself and to ask, so what's the benefit for us? And what's the use? Why is it completely or absolutely ridiculous? Because you have to end somewhere. Everything can't be useful for the sake of something else. That would go on to infinity and nothing would actually be useful. That chain has to end with something that is good in its own right, that is, strictly speaking, useless. Because to be useful is to be a good means for something else. There's to be something higher on this for the sake of chain. Well, this for the sake of chain has to end somewhere, and wherever it ends, namely the highest good, has to be good in its own right. It has to be, strictly speaking, useless because there's nothing else above it. There's nothing you would use it, nothing further you would use it for, right? And so, strictly speaking, it's useless. So, sorry, where were we? From everything a benefit and to ask, so what's the benefit for us and what's the use? For it's true what we say. Such a fellow, the person who would ask those questions about everything, what's the benefit? What's the use? Why are you doing it? Right? Such a fellow doesn't seem like someone who knows noble goodness, right? So you become a philosophy major and your parents ask you, well, what are you going to do with that? Mom, Dad, you guys don't know about noble goodness. Right? That's what you tell them. But okay, you probably don't want to tell them that. They'll probably stop paying your tuition. But the point is clear enough. It's no complaint against a field of study or a kind of knowledge, as Aristotle puts it, that it's useless. In fact, Aristotle would say that may very well be a point in its favor. That might be a sign that what you're studying now is, in fact, the most valuable kind of thing to study. The most valuable things are going to be, strictly speaking, useless. And so what Aristotle would say is like, okay, yeah, fine. Watch the video to learn philosophy, to pass class, get a degree, get money. Okay, fine. You need money to be generous and so on. Okay, we talked about that at length. And so it's not as though you shouldn't go get a job. You shouldn't get money. It's not as though money's bad. Aristotle wouldn't say that. But he'd say there's another reason why going to school or getting an education might be valuable. And in fact, this might even be more important. So yeah, go get your degree in something useful. Sure, right? Because you got to get a job, you got to get money. Aristotle's not saying that's a bad idea or silly or anything like that. No, go do that. But you should also approach your studies in this way, right? Some of the things that you're going to be doing while at Loyola, while getting your degree, might in fact be valuable in their own right. And Aristotle wants to say philosophy is something like that. And so what Aristotle would say, yeah, fine, learn philosophy, pass class, but also it could work like this at the same time. Watch the video to learn philosophy. Why? Well, because philosophy and developing your mind, not just philosophy, other humanities and other sciences and so on too, right? But we're just talking about philosophy, so that's why that's there, right? These other kinds of studies and pursuits help you acquire wisdom, right? You learn philosophy in order to acquire wisdom, and that just is the highest good. So yeah, learn philosophy in order to develop your mind so that you can live the life of the mind. That's really what a human being is called to, according to Aristotle. So yeah, sure, fine. You know, what Aristotle may very well say, yeah, go find do today. You know, his advice, Aristotle's advice for you today. Yeah, major in something practical. Sure, major in accounting or whatever. Right? I don't know. I apologize if you're an accountant. Well, I'm not being mean to it, I guess, but do something practical. Fine, make some money, get a job. But maybe double major as well. Double major in physics to understand how the world works. Double major in theology to understand how the divine works. Double major in philosophy. Double major in, I don't know, whatever, something in literature or something, right? I think all of these kinds of things, all these different disciplines that we have would in some way or other fall under the umbrella of what Aristotle calls wisdom, right? Double major in something that's less practical, but which develops your mind. That would be the Aristotelian idea. And what Aristotle would want to say is that it's really, yeah, okay, yeah, fine. You know, practical necessities, got to get a job. But what's really important actually is developing your mind. And universities are places where you do that, where you can do that. And so take advantage of it, I think Aristotle would say.